I was halfway through my morning coffee when my phone buzzed with a notification from my lake house security system, and my stomach dropped when I saw 3 unfamiliar cars parked in my driveway at the property I specifically remembered locking up 2 weeks ago. My name is Gregory Zimmerman, and I had worked my entire adult life to afford that lake house up in northern Michigan, right on the shores of Lake Charlevoix. It was my sanctuary, my escape from the daily grind of corporate consulting in Detroit, and the one place where I could actually breathe. I had bought it 5 years ago, a modest 3-bedroom cabin with a private dock and a view that made every mortgage payment worth it. The property sat in a gated community called Clearwater Shores, and like most gated communities, it came with a homeowners association that I had mostly ignored since moving in. The HOA president was a woman named Brenda Carmichael, a 50-something busybody who treated the community rules like they were handed down from heaven itself. She had short blonde hair cut in that aggressive soccer mom style, drove a white Lexus SUV with those stick figure family decals on the back window, and wore designer athleisure outfits to every single HOA meeting like she was about to run a marathon that never actually happened. I had learned quickly to avoid her whenever possible, keeping my head down and my property compliant with whatever ridiculous regulations she dreamed up. But this was different. This was not about my grass being a quarter-inch too tall or my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. Someone was in my house, and according to the security footage I was now pulling up on my phone, they had been there for at least 2 days. I zoomed in on the live feed from my front door camera. A woman who looked eerily familiar was lounging on my deck furniture, sipping what appeared to be lemonade from my kitchen glasses. 2 kids, maybe 10 and 12 years old, were running around my yard in bathing suits. A man, presumably the husband, was down at my dock, untying my boat. They were taking out my boat. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the door, calling my buddy Marcus on the way out. "I need you to meet me at the lake house," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Someone is squatting in my place." "What? Are you serious?" Marcus worked as a paralegal and had helped me with the property purchase. He knew the law better than most people I knew. "Dead serious. I am looking at them right now on my security camera. They are treating it like a vacation rental." "Have you called the police?" "I am about to. I just wanted to give you a heads up. I might need legal backup on this. I will be there in 3 hours. Do not do anything stupid, Greg." I promised I would not, but I was already calculating how fast I could get to Charlevoix. The drive from Detroit usually took about 4 hours, but I was angry enough to make it in 3.5. I called the local police department as I merged onto I-75 North, explaining the situation to a dispatcher who sounded like she had heard it all before. She told me an officer would meet me at the property and that I should not confront the occupants myself. I agreed, though every fiber of my being wanted to storm in there and demand answers. The drive felt endless. I kept checking my phone at red lights, watching the security footage as these strangers treated my property like their own personal resort. The kids were now jumping off my dock into the lake. The woman had moved inside and appeared to be cooking something in my kitchen. The audacity was breathtaking. As I crossed into northern Michigan, my phone rang. It was a number I recognized from the HOA directory. Brenda Carmichael. I answered with barely contained fury. "What?" "Gregory, hi, this is Brenda from the Clearwater Shores HOA. I am just calling to remind you that your annual dues are coming up next month, and we need to discuss some violations we have noticed at your property." "Violations?" I nearly swerved off the road. "Are you kidding me right now? There are people illegally occupying my house and you are calling about violations. There was a pause. "I am sorry, what are you talking about, my lake house? There are strangers living in it right now. Did you give someone permission to use my property?" Another pause, longer this time. "I think there might be some confusion here, Gregory. Let us discuss this when you arrive." The line went dead. That was when I knew. Brenda was involved somehow. The way she had deflected, the sudden end to the conversation, the mention of confusion. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I pulled into Clearwater Shores just after 2 in the afternoon. The security guard at the gate, an older gentleman named Ralph, who I had always gotten along with, looked surprised to see me. "Mr. Zimmerman, I did not know you were coming up this week." "I was not planning to, Ralph. Did anyone ask about accessing my property recently?" He scratched his head. "Well, Mrs. Carmichael did mention something about your place being available for use. She said it was approved." "Approved by who? I am the owner." Ralph's face fell. "Oh no, she said you had given permission through the HOA for community use during vacant periods, something about a new program." "There is no program, Ralph. Those people are trespassing." I did not wait for his response. I drove through the gates and headed straight for my property, my heart pounding. A police cruiser was already parked outside, and I felt a wave of relief seeing it there. The officer was a woman in her 40s, her name tag reading Deputy Chen. She approached my car as I parked. "Mr. Zimmerman, that's me. Thank you for coming. I need to see your ID and proof of ownership before we proceed." I handed her my driver's license and pulled up the property deed on my phone, along with my mortgage statements and utility bills. She examined everything carefully, then nodded. "All right. Stay here while I make contact with the occupants." I watched as Deputy Chen walked up to my front door and knocked. The woman I had seen on camera answered, and I finally got a clear look at her face. It was Brenda's daughter. I had seen her at a few HOA events, though I had never learned her name. She was in her late 20s, with the same aggressive blonde hair as her mother and an entitled expression that made my blood boil. I could not hear the conversation from my car, but I saw the daughter's face shift from confusion to anger to something like fear. She called back into the house, and the husband appeared, looking equally bewildered. Deputy Chen was gesturing to her cruiser, then to my car, clearly explaining that I was the actual owner and they had no legal right to be there. The daughter pulled out her phone and made a call. Moments later, a white Lexus SUV came flying down the street and screeched to a halt behind the police cruiser. Brenda Carmichael emerged like a tornado in Lululemon leggings. "Officer, there has been a terrible misunderstanding," she announced, marching up to the group with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences in her life. "This property is part of our HOA community sharing program. My daughter has every right to be here." Deputy Chen turned to her with the patience of someone used to dealing with difficult people. "Madam, are you the property owner?" "No, but I am the HOA president, and our bylaws clearly state, unless you are the property owner or have written authorization from the property owner, you have no authority to allow access to this residence." I got out of my car, unable to stay away any longer. "I never gave anyone permission to use my house, Brenda." "What the hell were you thinking?" Brenda's face flushed red. "Your property was sitting vacant, Gregory. We have been trying to reach you for weeks about the community sharing initiative. It is wasteful to leave these homes empty when families could be enjoying them. You tried to reach me for weeks. I checked my email this morning. There was nothing except your monthly newsletter spam. We sent a letter to your primary residence." "A letter? You broke into my house based on a letter you claim you sent." My voice was rising and Deputy Chen held up a hand. "Everyone, please calm down. Mr. Zimmerman, did you receive any official correspondence about this alleged program? No. Nothing. I have no idea what she is talking about. Deputy Chen turned back to Brenda. Do you have documentation of this program? HOA board meeting minutes where it was approved? Any written agreement with Mr. Zimmerman? Brenda's confidence was starting to crack. The program was approved at last month's board meeting. The minutes are on file. That does not give you the right to enter someone's private property without their explicit consent, Deputy Chen said firmly. Even if such a program exists, homeowners must opt in voluntarily. You cannot simply decide to use someone's house. But the bylaws do not supersede property rights and trespassing laws. The daughter, whose name I learned was Stephanie, started crying. Mom, you said this was okay. You said Gregory had agreed to this. Brenda shot her daughter a look that could have melted steel. Stephanie, not now. How did you even get in? I demanded. I changed all the locks last year. Brenda's silence was damning. Deputy Chen picked up on it immediately. Mrs. Carmichael, how did your daughter gain access to this property? The HOA has master keys for emergency purposes. Emergency purposes, I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. My house being empty while I work in Detroit is not an emergency. We are trying to build community here, Gregory. You are never here. You show up maybe twice a month, if that. This beautiful property just sits empty while families who could actually use it. It is my property, I interrupted. I do not care if I visit it once a year. It is mine. You had no right. Deputy Chen was taking notes. Mrs. Carmichael, using HOA emergency access for personal use is a serious matter. You essentially provided your daughter with the means to commit breaking and entering. That is ridiculous. We did not break anything. You entered without authorization. In Michigan, that is criminal trespass at minimum. Because you used a key to gain access under false pretenses, we are looking at potential breaking and entering charges. Brenda's face went pale. You cannot be serious. I am very serious. Mr. Zimmerman, do you wish to press charges? I looked at Brenda, at her daughter still crying on my porch, at the two kids who were now standing in the doorway looking scared and confused, at the husband who seemed like he was realizing his vacation was about to turn into a legal nightmare. Yes, I said. I want to press charges against everyone involved. Brenda's mouth fell open. Gregory, please, can we discuss this reasonably? My daughter did not know. Your daughter is an adult who should have questioned why her mother was giving her free access to someone else's lake house. Your son-in-law should have questioned it. You definitely should not have done it. So yes, I am pressing charges. Deputy Chen nodded. All right. I am going to need everyone to step outside. Stephanie, I need to see some identification. The next hour was a blur of statements, photographs, and paperwork. Deputy Chen called for backup, and another officer arrived to help document the scene. They photographed the cars in my driveway, the belongings the family had brought inside, the evidence that they had been living there for multiple days. Marcus arrived in the middle of it all, taking in the scene with wide eyes. Man, you were not kidding. I wish I was. He pulled me aside while the police did their work. This is bad for them. Like, really bad. Breaking and entering, criminal trespass, possibly theft if they used any of your utilities or property. Brenda is claiming it was authorized by some HOA program. Marcus shook his head. Does not matter. HOAs cannot override property law. Even if there was such a program, you would have to explicitly opt in, and using an emergency key for non-emergency purposes. That is abuse of authority at minimum. Deputy Chen approached us. Mr. Zimmerman, we are going to need you to go through the house and document anything that is missing or damaged. I walked through my home with a pit in my stomach. The family had made themselves comfortable. There were groceries in my fridge, their clothes in my bedroom closets, toys scattered across the living room floor. They had used my towels, my sheets, my dishes. The boat was back at the dock, and I could see scuff marks on the hull that had not been there before. In my office, my laptop was moved. I always left it in a specific position, and it was now several inches to the left. The realization that strangers had been in this space, touching my things, using my belongings, made me feel violated in a way I had not expected. I documented everything on my phone, taking photos and videos as I went. In the kitchen, I found receipts from local restaurants charged to a credit card. In the garbage, there were beer bottles and wine corks. They had been partying in my house. When I returned outside, Stephanie and her husband were being placed in the back of a police cruiser. The kids were with Brenda, who looked like she had aged 10 years in the past hour. "What about her?" I asked Deputy Chen, gesturing to Brenda. "She is being charged as an accessory. We will need her to come to the station for booking, but given that she has no prior record and is cooperative, she will likely be released on her own recognizance. And her daughter, same charges, but the prosecutor will decide how to proceed. Because this was premeditated and involved the use of a fraudulently obtained key, it is more serious than simple trespass." Marcus was on his phone, already looking up precedents. "Greg, you might also have grounds for a civil suit. Emotional distress, unauthorized use of property, damage to belongings. We could go after both Brenda personally and the HOA as an organization if they are found to be negligent in their key policies." I nodded, my mind spinning. "Let us focus on the criminal charges first." Deputy Chen handed me a case number and her card. "You will need to secure your property immediately. Change the locks, update your security system codes. I would also recommend filing a complaint with your HOA board about Mrs. Carmichael's conduct." "Oh, I intend to do a lot more than that." After the police left with Stephanie and her husband, and Brenda departed with her traumatized grandchildren, Marcus and I sat on my deck looking out at the lake. The sun was starting to set, painting the water in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if I was not so angry. "This is insane," Marcus said. "I have seen HOA overreach before, but this is next level. What do I do now?" "Well, first, you make sure criminal charges stick. That sends a message. Second, you file a formal complaint with the HOA board and demand Brenda's immediate removal as president. Third, you sue for damages. And fourth, you make sure every homeowner in this community knows what happened so it never happens again." I took a sip of the beer I had grabbed from my own fridge, grateful that at least these were mine and not left by the trespassers. "How much trouble are they actually in?" Marcus pulled up something on his phone. "In Michigan, home invasion charges can range from a misdemeanor to a felony depending on the circumstances. Since they had a key and did not actually break anything, it will probably be charged as unlawful entry, which is a misdemeanor with up to 93 days in jail and a fine. But with Brenda's involvement and the premeditation, the prosecutor might go harder. The civil damages could be significant too. You are talking about unauthorized use of property, potential identity theft if they used your utilities, emotional distress, cost of enhanced security measures. Could easily be $50,000 or more. I do not even care about the money, I admitted. I just want them to understand they cannot do this to people. Then you are fighting the right fight. We spent the rest of the evening changing locks and resetting security codes. I called a locksmith in town who agreed to come out first thing in the morning for a complete lock replacement. I also upgraded my security system to include interior cameras and motion sensors, something I had been meaning to do anyway. That night, I barely slept in my own bed, hyper-aware of every sound the house made. It felt contaminated somehow, like the sanctuary I had worked so hard to create had been invaded and sullied. I kept thinking about Stephanie and her family sleeping in my bed, eating at my table, swimming off my dock like they owned the place. The next morning, Marcus headed back to Detroit for work, promising to start drafting the civil complaint. I stayed at the lake house, determined not to let Brenda's actions drive me away from my own property. Around 10, there was a knock at my door. I checked the new security camera feed first and saw an older man I recognized as Bill Henderson, one of the HOA board members. I opened the door cautiously. "Bill." "Greg, I heard what happened. I am so sorry. The board had an emergency meeting this morning, and I wanted to come by personally to apologize and explain." I stepped aside to let him in. Bill was in his 70s, a retired engineer who had always seemed reasonable during the few HOA meetings I had attended. He sat down heavily on my couch. "The board voted unanimously to suspend Brenda as president, effective immediately. We also voted to turn over all HOA master keys to a bonded key management company with strict access protocols. What she did was unconscionable. Did you know about this community sharing program she mentioned?" Bill shook his head vigorously. "There is no such program. We looked through 6 months of meeting minutes. Brenda never proposed anything like that, and it was never voted on. She made it up entirely." "Why would she do that?" "Honestly, I think she felt entitled to it. Her daughter was complaining about not being able to afford a vacation, and Brenda saw your place sitting empty and convinced herself it was wasteful. She has always had this attitude that being HOA president gives her some kind of supreme authority over the community. We have had complaints before, but nothing like this." "What kind of complaints?" Bill sighed. "She has entered people's yards without permission to measure grass height. She has issued fines for decorations she personally did not like, even when they were within guidelines. Last year, she tried to force the Johnsons to repaint their house because she decided their shade of blue was not on the approved list, even though it clearly was. Most people just paid the fines or backed down because fighting the HOA is exhausting. But this is different. This is criminal. How did she even have access to master keys? As president, she was authorized to maintain them for legitimate emergencies, like if someone's house was flooding or there was a fire and we needed to shut off utilities. It is a common practice in gated communities. But there are supposed to be logs, documentation, board notification. She had none of that. She just used the key for her personal benefit." I leaned back in my chair. "I want her off the board entirely, Bill, not just suspended. Gone. We can call for a vote to remove her, but that requires a community-wide ballot. It takes time. Then start the process. I also want a complete audit of HOA finances. If she was willing to do this, what else has she been doing?" Bill nodded slowly. "That is a fair request. I will bring it to the board. Greg, for what it is worth, most of us on the board are horrified by this. We want to make it right." "I appreciate that, but nothing is right until there are real consequences." After Bill left, I spent the day cleaning my house from top to bottom, trying to erase any trace of the unauthorized occupants. I washed all the linens, scrubbed the bathrooms, reorganized the kitchen. It was therapeutic in a way, reclaiming my space through physical labor. My phone rang constantly. Other HOA members calling to express their shock and support. A reporter from the local newspaper asking for an interview, which I declined. My mother calling to make sure I was okay after I had briefly mentioned the situation to her. And then, surprisingly, a call from Stephanie's husband, whose name I learned was Jason. "Mr. Zimmerman, please do not hang up," he said quickly when I answered. "I just wanted to apologize. I know that does not fix anything, but I need you to know that we had no idea this was not legitimate. Brenda told us you had agreed to let us use the house through some HOA exchange program. She showed us paperwork that looked official. We never would have stayed if we had known the truth." I wanted to stay angry, but there was genuine distress in his voice. "Jason, right?" "Yes, sir." "You are an adult. You should have questioned why someone would just give you free access to a lake house. You should have asked to speak to me directly. You should have done any number of things that would have revealed this was not legitimate. You are absolutely right. We were stupid and desperate. Money has been tight, and when Brenda offered this vacation, it seemed like a miracle. That is not an excuse, just the truth. My kids are terrified. Stephanie is devastated. We are facing criminal charges and probably bankruptcy from the legal fees and potential lawsuit. Our lives are ruined. You ruined them yourselves when you decided not to ask questions." There was a long pause. "Is there anything we can do to make this right? Any way to show how sorry we are? Cooperate fully with the investigation. Tell the truth about how Brenda manipulated you. Take responsibility for your actions, and never, ever do something like this again. We will, I promise. Thank you for even listening to me." After he hung up, I felt conflicted. They were victims of Brenda's scheme in a way, but they were also adults who should have known better. My sympathy had limits. The following week was a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Stephanie and Jason were arraigned on charges of trespassing and unlawful entry. Brenda was charged as an accessory and with abuse of her position within the HOA. All three pleaded not guilty initially, but their lawyer, a harried-looking public defender, seemed to be encouraging them toward a plea deal. Marcus filed the civil lawsuit on my behalf, suing Brenda personally, Stephanie and Jason, and the Clearwater Shores HOA for negligence in key management. The amount we were seeking was $75,000, covering property damage, enhanced security costs, emotional distress, and legal fees. The HOA, now under Bill's temporary leadership, hired their own lawyer and immediately moved to distance themselves from Brenda's actions. They issued a community-wide letter explaining what had happened and the steps they were taking to prevent future abuses. The letter also announced that they would not fight the negligence claim and would likely settle to avoid further legal costs. I attended the HOA board meeting the following week, where Brenda's removal was being discussed. The community center was packed with homeowners, many of whom I had never met. News of the trespassing incident had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Brenda was there, sitting in the front row with her arms crossed and a defiant expression on her face. She had hired her own lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who kept whispering in her ear. Bill called the meeting to order. "We are here to discuss the removal of Brenda Carmichael as HOA president and board member, based on her actions regarding the unauthorized access of Gregory Zimmerman's property. Brenda has the right to speak in her own defense before we open the floor for discussion and vote." Brenda stood up, and I could see her hands shaking slightly. "I have served this community for 8 years as president. 8 years of dealing with complaints, enforcing rules, organizing events, and maintaining property values. I have given my time and energy to making Clearwater Shores a desirable place to live. And now I am being crucified for trying to implement a program that would benefit families in need." Someone in the back shouted, "By breaking into someone's house." Brenda's lawyer whispered something to her, and she continued. "There was a misunderstanding about the approval process for the community sharing program. I acknowledge that I should have been more careful about documentation, but my intentions were good. I was trying to help my daughter, who is struggling financially, and make use of a resource that was sitting vacant. I stood up. You keep calling it a misunderstanding and talking about good intentions. You stole my keys, entered my private property without permission, and let your family treat it like a hotel. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a crime. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Brenda turned to face me. Your property was empty 90% of the time, Gregory. Empty and wasted while hardworking families cannot afford vacations. I was trying to create something positive. With my property, without my permission, that is called theft. Her lawyer stood up. Mrs. Carmichael is willing to resign as president to avoid further conflict, but she maintains that her actions were taken in what she believed to be the best interest of the community. Bill cut in. This is not about resignation. This is about removal. There is a significant difference. A vote to remove her creates a record and sends a clear message that this behavior is unacceptable. The discussion went on for another 30 minutes, with various homeowners standing up to share their own experiences with Brenda's overreach. The Johnsons talked about the forced repainting incident. A man named Carl described how Brenda had issued him a fine for parking his work truck in his own driveway because she decided it was an eyesore. A woman named Patricia recounted how Brenda had threatened to fine her for having a vegetable garden that was supposedly against HOA rules, even though no such rule existed. By the time the vote was called, the outcome was clear. The motion to remove Brenda Carmichael from the HOA board passed with 87% approval. Only a handful of her close friends voted to keep her. Brenda stood up, her face red with humiliation and anger. You are all making a mistake. This community will fall apart without my leadership. You will see. She stormed out, her lawyer scrambling to follow her. Bill looked exhausted but relieved. All right, we will need to hold elections for a new president. In the meantime, I will serve as interim president. Our next order of business is addressing the key management issue. I stayed for the rest of the meeting, watching as the board voted on new security measures, including a requirement for multiple board members to approve any emergency key access, detailed logging of all key usage, and quarterly audits. They also voted to change all community master keys and rekey any locks that had been accessed using the old system. As people filed out after the meeting, several homeowners approached me to apologize and thank me for standing up to Brenda. One woman, elderly and soft-spoken, grabbed my hand. "Thank you," she said. "Brenda has been terrorizing this community for years. Most of us were too afraid to fight back because we did not want the hassle or the retaliation. You did what we could not." It felt strange to be thanked for something that had started as a personal violation. But I realized that by pressing charges and refusing to back down, I had inadvertently helped the entire community. The criminal case moved forward over the next several weeks. The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Linda Torres, was aggressive in pursuing the charges. She saw it as an open and shut case of trespassing and abuse of authority, and she wanted to make an example of it. Stephanie and Jason eventually agreed to a plea deal. They pleaded guilty to criminal trespass and were sentenced to probation, community service, and restitution for damages to my property. The restitution was set at $5,000, covering the cost of lock replacements, security upgrades, and professional cleaning. Brenda, however, refused to take a deal. Her lawyer convinced her that she could fight the accessory charges and claim she had not technically entered the property herself. It was a risky strategy, and it backfired spectacularly. The trial was held in Charlevoix County Circuit Court in mid-June. I was called as a witness, along with Deputy Chen, Bill Henderson, and even Ralph, the security guard. The prosecutor laid out a timeline of events that painted Brenda as a manipulative narcissist who had abused her position for personal gain. The defense argued that Brenda had genuinely believed she had the authority to implement the community sharing program, and that there was no criminal intent. They painted her as a dedicated volunteer who had made an honest mistake. But under cross-examination, Brenda's story fell apart. When asked why she had not contacted me directly to ask permission, she claimed she had sent a letter that I must have ignored. When presented with evidence that no such letter existed in postal records, she backtracked and said she might have forgotten to mail it. When asked why she had not brought the program to a board vote if it was legitimate, she claimed she had informal approval from board members. Bill Henderson's testimony directly contradicted that claim. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Brenda guilty of being an accessory to criminal trespass and of abuse of her fiduciary duty as HOA president, which carried civil penalties but also factored into sentencing. The judge was clearly unimpressed with Brenda's defense. Mrs. Carmichael, you held a position of trust within your community. You were entrusted with emergency access to private property for the safety and well-being of your neighbors. Instead, you used that access to benefit your family at someone else's expense. This was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate abuse of power. I am sentencing you to 90 days in county jail, suspended pending completion of 200 hours of community service, 2 years of probation, and full restitution to Mr. Zimmerman for all damages and legal fees. Brenda's face went white. Your Honor, please, I have never been in trouble before. I have grandchildren who need me. You should have thought about that before you committed a crime. Sentence stands. The civil case settled a month later. The HOA's insurance company agreed to pay $50,000 to cover their negligence in key management. Brenda was personally liable for an additional $25,000 in damages. Stephanie and Jason's $5,000 in criminal restitution was credited toward the civil settlement. In total, I received $75,000, minus Marcus's legal fees and the costs I had already incurred for security upgrades. The money was nice, but it was never really about the money. It was about the principle. By August, life had mostly returned to normal. I was spending more time at the lake house, partly because I wanted to reclaim the space and partly because the whole ordeal had reminded me why I bought it in the first place. The HOA had elected a new president, a retired teacher named Margaret Wilson, who seemed genuinely committed to transparency and following proper procedures. One Friday evening, I was sitting on my deck with a glass of wine, watching the sunset over Lake Charlevoix. My phone buzzed with an email from Marcus. All settlements finalized. Brenda completed her first month of community service. She's been assigned to trash pickup along the highways. Thought you'd appreciate the irony. I did appreciate it. The image of Brenda in an orange vest picking up garbage was deeply satisfying. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I thought about everything that had happened over the past few months. The violation of my privacy, the legal battles, the stress and anger. But also the sense of justice, the positive changes in the HOA, and the relationships I had built with neighbors who had rallied to support me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. Mr. Zimmerman, this is Stephanie. I just wanted to let you know that Jason and I completed our community service today. We have also been going to counseling to address why we made such poor decisions. I know nothing I say can undo what we did, but I hope you can find peace knowing we are truly sorry and working to be better people. Thank you for holding us accountable. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I appreciate you reaching out. I hope you have learned from this. Good luck to you and your family. It was not forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement. They had made terrible choices, but they were owning up to them. That was more than Brenda had ever done. A few days later, I was at the local hardware store in Charlevoix picking up some supplies for a deck repair project when I ran into Ralph, the security guard from the community gate. "Mr. Zimmerman, good to see you," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did. The new key protocols are much better. I feel like I can actually do my job properly now without worrying about people like Brenda pulling rank." "I am glad something good came out of it, Ralph. You know, in 30 years of working security for gated communities, I have never seen someone stand up to an HOA president like that. Most people just cave because it is easier. You did the right thing." We chatted for a few more minutes before parting ways. As I loaded my supplies into my truck, I realized that Ralph's words meant more to me than the settlement money ever could. Standing up to Brenda had been exhausting and stressful, but it had been necessary. The following month, I attended my first HOA meeting under the new leadership. Margaret Wilson ran it efficiently, with clear agendas and actual votes on decisions rather than autocratic pronouncements. The atmosphere was completely different from the tense, contentious meetings under Brenda's rule. During the open forum section, a homeowner named Susan raised her hand. "I just want to say publicly that I think the community owes Greg Zimmerman a debt of gratitude. What happened to him was horrible, but his willingness to fight back has made this a better place for all of us." There was a round of applause, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "I appreciate that, but I was really just protecting my own property. The bigger changes were all of you deciding enough was enough." Margaret smiled from her position at the head table. "Nevertheless, you showed courage when it mattered. That is worth recognizing." After the meeting, several neighbors invited me to a barbecue they were hosting the following weekend. It was the first time I felt genuinely welcomed into the community, rather than just tolerated as a part-time resident. The barbecue was at the home of Tom and Linda Peterson, a retired couple who lived 3 doors down from me. Their backyard faced the lake, and they had set up tables and a grill for what turned out to be about 20 neighbors. As the evening wore on and the wine flowed, people started sharing their own Brenda horror stories. It became almost comedic, the absurd lengths she had gone to enforce her vision of how the community should look and function. Carl, the man with the work truck, described how Brenda had once threatened to have his vehicle towed from his own driveway unless he parked it in his garage. I told her my garage was full of tools and equipment for my business. She said that was my problem, and I needed to figure it out or face fines. I ended up renting a storage unit off-site just to avoid dealing with her. Patricia, the woman with the vegetable garden, laughed ruefully as she recounted her battle. She told me vegetable gardens were for farms, not upscale communities. I showed her that there was no rule against gardens in the bylaws. She said she would create one. I told her that required a community vote. She said she would call the vote and make sure it passed. I ended up rallying enough neighbors to block it, but it was months of stress over some tomato plants. As I listened to these stories, I realized how toxic Brenda's leadership had truly been. She had created an environment of fear and compliance, where people were constantly worried about arbitrary rules and vindictive enforcement. The fact that it had taken my extreme situation to finally bring her down was somewhat depressing, but at least it had happened. Tom Peterson raised his glass. To new leadership and to actually enjoying our homes without fear of the HOA police. Everyone drank to that. As summer turned to fall, I found myself spending more and more time at the lake house. I was still working full-time in Detroit, but I had negotiated a hybrid arrangement that allowed me to work remotely 2 days a week. Those remote work days became my favorite, sitting on my deck with my laptop, taking breaks to kayak or swim. In October, I received notification that Brenda had completed her community service hours. As part of her probation terms, she was also required to write a formal apology letter to me. It arrived via certified mail, a single page of what read like it had been drafted by her lawyer and signed under duress. There was no genuine remorse in the words, just legal obligation being fulfilled. I threw it in the recycling bin and did not think about it again. That Thanksgiving, I hosted my family at the lake house for the first time since the incident. My parents, my sister and her husband, and my 2 nephews all came up for the long weekend. It was chaotic and loud and perfect, exactly what the house was meant for. My mother pulled me aside while we were cleaning up after dinner. "I am proud of you, for standing up for yourself. Your father and I raised you to not let people walk all over you, and you really demonstrated that." "Thanks, Mom. It was not easy. The important things never are." My nephews, 8 and 10 years old, spent the weekend exploring the property and playing on the dock. Watching them enjoy the space that I had fought so hard to protect filled me with a sense of rightness. This was my sanctuary, and I had defended it. That mattered. In December, the HOA held its annual holiday party at the community center. It was the first one I had actually attended in the 5 years I had owned property there. The mood was celebratory, with people genuinely seeming to enjoy each other's company rather than walking on eggshells around the HOA president. Margaret Wilson made a toast to a year of change and growth. We learned some hard lessons about accountability and respect for property rights. But we also came together as a community in a way we had not before. Here is to continuing that in the new year. I found myself actually looking forward to future HOA meetings and events, something I never would have imagined under Brenda's regime. One snowy evening in January, almost a year after the initial incident, I was at the lake house alone. I had started a fire in the fireplace and was reading a book when I heard a car pull up outside. The security camera alert showed a familiar white Lexus SUV. My heart rate spiked. What was Brenda doing here? I watched on the camera as she got out of the car and walked slowly toward my front door. She was not wearing her usual athleisure uniform. Instead, she looked smaller somehow, diminished, in a plain winter coat and jeans. She knocked softly. I debated not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door but left the screen door latched. "Brenda, what do you want?" She looked up at me, and I was startled to see that she had been crying. "I know I am probably the last person you want to see. I just needed to talk to you person to person, not through lawyers. We have nothing to talk about. Please, just 5 minutes. I will leave and never bother you again." Against my better judgment, I unlatched the screen door and stepped out onto the porch, leaving the main door open behind me in case I needed to retreat quickly. Brenda wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "I wanted to apologize." Really apologize, not the legal letter my lawyer made me send. What I did was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I did it. I convinced myself it was justified because your house sat empty and my daughter needed help. But that was not my decision to make. I said nothing, waiting to see if there was more. "I have lost everything," she continued. "My position on the HOA board, my reputation in the community, my friendships. My husband is barely speaking to me because of the legal fees and the embarrassment. Stephanie and Jason are in financial ruin because of me. My grandchildren are traumatized, and I did it all to myself by being so convinced that I knew better than everyone else. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to know that I understand now. I spent 200 hours picking up trash on the side of the highway, and I had a lot of time to think about how I treated people. How I used my position to bully and control instead of serve. How I valued my own judgment over everyone else's rights. I was wrong. I am sorry. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. All I saw was exhaustion and genuine regret. Brenda, I appreciate you coming here and saying this, but it does not change what happened. You violated my privacy, my property rights, and my trust. You put your daughter and her family in legal jeopardy. You abused your authority for years before this incident. I am glad you have had time to reflect, but some things cannot be undone with an apology. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. I know. I just needed you to hear it from me. I needed to own what I did. Then consider it owned, but I need you to leave now, and please do not come back. I understand. Thank you for listening. I watched as she walked back to her car and drove away. The encounter left me feeling unsettled but also oddly at peace. She had finally taken real responsibility, even if it was too little too late. I went back inside and returned to my book, the fire crackling softly in the background. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How's the lake house?" "Peaceful," I typed back. Finally. And it was. The months of stress and legal battles had been worth it to reclaim this space. The house felt like mine again in a way it had not since the incident. The new locks, the upgraded security, the knowledge that the HOA could never abuse their authority like that again, it all contributed to a sense of safety and ownership that I had taken for granted before. As winter deepened, I continued my hybrid work arrangement, spending more and more time at the lake house. I bought cross-country skis and spent weekends exploring the snow-covered trails around Lake Charlevoix. I joined a local book club that met in town once a month. I started dating a woman named Rachel who worked at the library in Charlevoix and shared my love of the outdoors. Life moved on, as it always does. The incident with Brenda became a story I told at parties, something that sounded almost unbelievable to people who had not lived through it. But it had changed me in fundamental ways. I was more protective of my boundaries, more willing to stand up for myself, and more aware of how easily authority could be abused if left unchecked. The HOA under Margaret's leadership thrived. They implemented regular audits, term limits for board positions, and a transparent complaint process. Property values in Clearwater Shores actually increased, as word spread that the community had cleaned house and was now one of the better-run HOAs in northern Michigan. In March, I ran into Jason, Stephanie's husband, at a coffee shop in Charlevoix. We made eye contact and I saw him hesitate, clearly unsure whether to approach me or pretend he had not seen me. I made the decision for him, walking over to his table. "Jason, Mr. Zimmerman." "Hi." He looked nervous. "How are you and Stephanie doing?" He seemed surprised by the question. "We are hanging in there. We finished our probation last month, still paying off the restitution in installments, but we are making progress. Stephanie got a better job and we have been going to therapy. Things are slowly getting better." "I am glad to hear that. Really, I never wanted to ruin your lives, I just wanted accountability for what happened." Jason nodded slowly. "You got it. And we learned from it, truly. We will never put ourselves in that position again. We question everything now, maybe too much, but it is better than blindly trusting the wrong people." We talked for a few more minutes before parting ways. It was not friendship, but it was closure. They had paid their debt to society and to me, and they were rebuilding their lives. That was the best outcome I could have hoped for. As spring arrived and the ice melted off Lake Charlevoix, I stood on my dock watching the sun rise over the water. The property had been through a violation and a healing process, much like I had, but we had both come out stronger on the other side. My phone rang. It was Margaret Wilson from the HOA. "Greg, sorry to call so early. I wanted to give you a heads up that Brenda has put her house up for sale. She and her husband are moving out of the community." "When?" "Closing is set for next month." "I thought you should know in case you run into her during the moving process." "Thanks for letting me know, Margaret." "Of course. I also wanted to say that your term on the Architectural Review Committee has been great. Would you consider running for a board position in the fall elections?" "We could use someone with your integrity." I laughed. "A year ago, I wanted nothing to do with the HOA. Now you want me to join the board. A lot can change in a year. Think about it." "I will think about it." After hanging up, I realized I was actually considering it. Being part of the HOA board would give me a voice in making sure the abuses of Brenda's era never happened again. It would let me help shape the community into something positive, rather than just reacting to its problems. In May, I watched from my window as a moving truck pulled up to Brenda's house. I did not go over or acknowledge the move. That chapter was closed and there was nothing more to say. By summer, new neighbors had moved into Brenda's old house. A young family with 3 kids who immediately became popular on the block for their friendly demeanor and their impressive 4th of July fireworks display. I spent that 4th of July at Tom and Linda Peterson's barbecue again, now an annual tradition. As fireworks lit up the sky over Lake Charlevoix, I looked around at my neighbors, people who had become genuine friends over the past year and a half. Carl raised his beer. "To Greg, for saving us from HOA tyranny." Everyone laughed and drank, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. This was community the way it was supposed to be, built on mutual respect and genuine connection rather than fear and compliance. In September, I officially threw my name in for an open HOA board position. To my surprise, I ran unopposed and was elected unanimously. My first board meeting was surreal, sitting at the head table instead of in the audience, helping make decisions for the community rather than having them imposed on me. One of our first votes was to establish a property rights protection policy, explicitly stating that HOA authority ended at the property line, and that emergency access would be subject to strict oversight and documentation. I drafted the language myself, with input from Marcus. It passed unanimously. As fall turned to winter, I found myself reflecting on how much my life had changed since that day I saw strangers on my security camera. The violation had been traumatic, but it had also been transformative. I had found my voice, built meaningful relationships, and helped create positive change in my community. The lake house was still my sanctuary, but now it was something more. It was proof that standing up for yourself mattered, that holding people accountable was worth the effort, that communities could heal and grow from even the most divisive incidents if people were willing to do the work. On Christmas Eve, I hosted the HOA board for a small gathering at my house. Margaret, Bill, Tom, Linda, and a few others sat around my fireplace, drinking wine and discussing plans for the coming year. The conversation was warm, collaborative, and focused on genuine service to the community rather than power and control. As everyone was leaving, Margaret pulled me aside. "You know, when this whole thing happened last year, I worried it would tear the community apart. Instead, it brought us together. Funny how that works." "Not funny," I said. "Necessary. Sometimes things have to break before they can be fixed properly, she smiled. Wise words. See you at the next meeting, Board Member Zimmerman. After everyone left, I stood on my deck in the cold night air, looking out at the frozen lake. The property was quiet, peaceful, mine in every sense of the word. The violation was a memory now, a scar that had healed into something like wisdom. I thought about Brenda, wherever she was now, hopefully learning to live without the need to control everything around her. I thought about Stephanie and Jason, rebuilding their lives one day at a time. I thought about the community we had created in the aftermath of crisis. And I thought about myself, about the person I had become through fighting for what was mine. Stronger, more engaged, more willing to stand up when it mattered. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Hot chocolate tomorrow before the HOA holiday party. It's a date, I replied. As I headed inside and locked the door behind me, I realized that the lake house had finally, fully become what I had always wanted it to be. A sanctuary, yes, but also a home. A place where I belonged, protected not just by locks and security systems, but by genuine community and hard-won respect. The nightmare of finding strangers in my home had transformed into something unexpectedly positive. Justice served, lessons learned, and a community rebuilt on foundations of accountability and mutual respect. I poured myself a final glass of wine and settled in by the fire, content in the knowledge that my sanctuary was secure and my place in the community was earned. The battle with Brenda Carmichael and her entitled abuse of power was over, and I had won in every way that mattered. The lake house stood solid and warm against the winter cold, a testament to the principle that property rights matter, that standing up to bullies works, and that sometimes the worst violations can lead to the strongest foundations for the future. I had defended what was mine, held people accountable for their actions, and helped create lasting change in the process. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt genuinely grateful for everything that had happened, as painful as it had been. The violation had hurt, but the healing had been worth it. The fight had been exhausting, but the victory had been complete. And the community that emerged from the ashes of Brenda's reign was stronger, healthier, and more genuine than anything that had existed before. My lake house was mine again, truly and completely, and that made all the difference.